Hey y'all, my name is Jessica Lilly and I'm going to show you one of my favorite watercolor techniques today. This is a watercolor technique that I learned from watching Lorraine Watry's YouTube videos. I highly recommend her channel and her work. It's really wonderful. This is a masking tape mask, and it is my favorite way to have a sharp foreground and a blurry background. Having a mask over your foreground gives you a lot of access to your background without having to paint around anything in watercolor, which lets you be more fluid and more free about how you apply paint, because you can just paint right over the tape and it'll be wet, and we're going to do wet on wet work in the background. So let me show you what we've got to get started, and then I'll show you how we do the matte. So here's my source photo. This is a photograph that I took at a local woods. What I want is for this front tree and all these leaves to be sharp and glowing and in focus, and the rest of it I want to be really whimsical and really ephemeral and out of focus and blurry and a lot of shapes and dark values so that we can keep this contrast. I've already sketched out that photograph onto this paper, and you can see that I have two different densities of graphite in my drawing. The first is a lighter graphite that represents the entire drawing, and then I've gone over where I'm going to literally cut my masking tape mask with darker graphite, and that's so that once I get the tape on top, I can really clearly and easily see through my tape, and I know without being confused where am I going to cut. And what I'm literally going to do is put masking tape over all of this and then cut around my darker shapes so that when I'm done, there's masking tape on top of the tree and the leaves, and the background is just paper for me to paint straight on. All right. The type of paper that you use matters a lot for this process. Some papers are too soft to be able to stand up to any kind of masking tape, and they'll tear no matter what you do. So before you put this much work into something, test out a sample on whatever paper you have by putting masking tape down, varnishing it in really well so it's really firmly on there, and then peel it off and see if it tears your paper or not. This process that I'm doing, my expectation is that it tears my paper none, and it doesn't ruin the surface of my paper at all. I'm going to paint back on this actually after I pull the tape off. So this actual paper is Fabriano Artistico. It's 100% cotton, and it's kind of a harder base paper, and it works really well for this process. Similarly, there are only two kinds of tape that I would recommend for this. Both are contractor grade. This is the Scotch 2020. That's a contractor grade Scotch brand tape. So this is one that works okay, but it's not my favorite. And this is my favorite. This is the Duck Professional. You can see inside it says Duck Professional. These are tapes that you should be able to get at your local home store in the paintings, the wall painting section. So I'm going to use the duck tape today, and the last thing that we're going to need is just going to be an X-Acto blade. I have an old X-Acto knife that I use old gummy erasers to protect my blade and keep myself from getting stabbed with. And you need a sharp blade on here, right? So if your tape gives you any resistance and it's hard to cut with in any way, swap out the blade and put a new blade on. Having a sharp, fresh blade is a necessary part of this being easy and something that's manageable without damaging your paper. And that's all we need to get started. When we put down our tape, we don't have to cover the entire paper with our tape. We just need to cover the area that we're going to be cutting our mask around with tape. And so I literally just want to cover this tree with tape. And know that the tree is going vertically. I'm still going to do a horizontal application of tape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom and tape my way up. At the end, I want shingles of tape that go down like a roof from the top to the bottom, so that if I elevate my paper like this at all, the water will drip down this way on top of my shingles, not the opposite way. If it goes this way and I tilt my water up, the water can get entrapped underneath all that tape. And so we want that to not happen. We want the water to flow right down. So I'm going to do an overlap of about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to rough cut my tape on here. I don't need to cover my whole board with tape, right? I just need to cover my board with as much tape as covers my area that I'm masking. I want to do about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch overlap. I want to make sure I cover my whole drawing. And you can see here that what I've got is darker and I can see it right through the tape. The benefit of being able to see it through the tape, again, obviously, is that when I come to cut this, which is what I'm going to do, I can clearly see exactly where I need to cut and where I don't need to cut. I'm going to come down just a little bit lower here, specifically just to catch that tail of that little leaf bottom down there. But I can come in over here. I don't need to go. Now this isn't burnished down yet, and as I get higher up, I will burnish it down. I really want this to be a secure fit. I'm going to go all the way across here because I want to get these leaves over here in this piece. But I don't need to go all the way out that way, so. As I get closer to the top, I'm going to turn my board to make it a little easier for me to reach the other side. Good. I'm being careful not to cut the tape that my paper is fixed to my board with. I want to maintain the integrity of that. I'm just cutting this masking tape. And that's something to keep in mind too when you get to the edges of the masking tape. And know too that this is a skill. So if you're worried that you're going to put hours into a drawing, which I did do, and then cut through your paper or ruin your paper or something, then practice before you do it the first time. To figure out how hard to push, it's really just a learning curve. And once you kind of get the hang of it, you can see how hard. But the objective is to cut through the tape, which is pretty thin, and not to cut through our paper. Okay, so I want to do the same thing here where I have my part of my board where I'm working closest to me, and I'll turn my board as I go, which is a way that I paint as well. And then before I get started, I really want to make sure that my tape is down good. So I'm going to burnish with just my fingers. You know, I'm not really pushing really, really hard, but I am pushing firmly. I want the tape to be very adhered to my board. And so this is a good process to do if you're a detail-oriented person who likes realism. If you know looking at this, oh my God, that doesn't look fun at all, that stresses me out, then this might not be the process for you. This is a slow and tedious cutting process that requires a lot of patience and a lot of attention, and I am soothed in working this way. So know that, you know, every style isn't for everybody. And so it's always, I feel like it's always important to mention things like that. Like sometimes people in my local classes wonder, like, if everyone is suffering in the same way. And really so much of that is just personality and what suits us best and what we are motivated by or moved by. So as I make my way around these top edges, I'm going to go ahead and start pulling my tape as I go so I can see how we're doing, make sure stuff's coming off okay. And that's also a good time to note too, there are a lot of different ways to mask things too, right? Masking tape is not the only way. You also could mask with masking fluid. So as soon as I get to another tape section and there's an easy place to pull the tape, that's usually when I go ahead and pull my tape and see how I'm doing. And so far so good. Cut through this top layer of tape. Everything underneath is intact. Hold back that top layer. You can see that I have another cut around area. These little insets are part of my inspiration for doing this mask this way. I want these cutouts, and I want them to be uniform throughout the background. In watercolor, you know, if I want this to end up being a bright yellow in here, but I want it to like fade from my black and everything out here, doing a mask like this is really one of the only, or some kind of a mask, is really the only way to make that be an accomplishable or realistic thing to do. Because I can do it with a mask, I can do it in one big swipe. With a mask, I can just take my brush and paint just like this, and that's how my pigment gets in here. But if I don't have a mask, I have to paint around all these edges and into all these places, and then come back and match that. And so that's one of the reasons for doing the mask here, is because I like to be able to have this really wet, messy background. Another thing just to remind you of is that if you get into cutting this mask and you know, you have to take a break and come back and do it another day, like, that's okay. So much like how I paint as I move my way around I move my board. Just quick little tiny movements of my my fingers to get kind of wavy edges because I don't want it to be too smooth. And slowly pick up with this sharp tip to get these cutaways out of here. If you find that your tape is pulling like that, that's sometimes a sign that you need to consider getting a new blade on. So I might, after this, take a pause and switch my blade out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of the way around this mat the exact same way. I take out my cutouts as I go, make sure that they come out. I work very slowly and very carefully so as to not damage my paper. And if I encounter areas that didn't cut all the way through, I know about them right away. I can just do a recut. And again, I go up to the next piece of tape at any given time before I start taking my tape off. And if at the end, if we need to make little fixes, we can always add masking fluid back on and fix little parts with masking fluid. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to pull out than up if you want to keep those complicated edges, and sometimes some of these edges are harder to pull, and the reason is because they were under a double layer tape, and so they have to get cut a little bit more to get through the double layer of tape. So again, if it gives you a little bit of trouble where there was a double layer, just carefully go back in there with your blade and recut that edge again. As I go, the other thing I do is I cut around these cutaways. I'll bring this up so you can see up close this cutaway, and you can see what these edges are going to look like. They're very sharp compared to the edges that you get from masking fluid. Masking fluid edges retain the texture of the paper a little bit, and they have like kind of a characteristic edge, whereas a masking tape edge is really sharp. And so here's what that cutout looks like. Here's what that edge looks like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work the rest of the way around the whole board and get all the rest of the cutout done, and then I will come back. Okay, mask is all done. I'll show it to you up close so you can see some of the details and maybe some pencil lines through it. So it's pretty much just a very carefully cut masking tape mask. The shingles, like a roof shingles, go this way so that from the top to the bottom the water can flow over and not get caught under. And it's all ready to go. The last thing that I do before I paint over it is I use my finger to make sure that all of my edges are sealed down very securely and strongly. And I push everything down really well. I do that to all the edges and all the pieces. And then from here, you can just paint your background and ignore this as if the tape's not there. The background will stay white when you peel the tape off at the end, and the background will stay painted and the place underneath the tape will stay white at the end, and then you can fill in the foreground afterwards. So what I'll do is I'll just paint right over the tape, and I will leave the tape on until I'm completely done with my background. And I will also wait until my background is completely dry before I remove any tape. It needs to be 100% completely dry before I start to peel the tape off. But once it's painted and it's dry, I'll just peel off my tape, and then I'll have fresh paper that I can paint my foreground into. And I'm excited to move into the next phase. So if you want to see what happens to it next, probably check out my Instagram. That's where I post my work as it comes out of my studio. This is not updated. My Instagram is jessica.lily11. And drop me a comment. Let me know, have you done this before? What's your favorite way to mask? All right, talk to you guys later.